at the tools in the Q menu, and we use these tools to create various kinds of curves, and we also use the Q menu to edit those curves. Now we're going to move on and look at creating curves along with some of these specific tools in our menu on the left side of the interface. We'll start off with this tool here, which is called Surface by 2 Views. There is a pop-out menu as well, and this is a variation of the same tool, and we'll look at this one a little later in the video. For now, I'm going to use this one, which has a slight variation in the icon. So let's click on this, and we can see we get a dialog box here. Now we've got these fields here which are empty, and it is asking me to provide it with some guides or curves, and it wants these guides to be created on certain planes. In this case, the XY plane up, the XY plane down, and the XZ plane. This is where our gizmo in the bottom right hand corner of the UI comes into play. Now, one important thing that you need to understand is here we have our grid. Our grid is placed at position 0 on the Y axis. If we bring in our axis here, we can see here the green line going down, and then it changes color to this purple line. And what that means is that our ground 0 point here determines which is the up and which is the down. So anything that's on this green area here, i.e. on top of that horizon line, our 0 point, is considered up, and anything below that line here on our x-plane, i.e. the purple line here, is considered down. So it's a very important aspect to understand when using these tools. Otherwise, you're going to get unwanted results when the mesh is generated. So let's turn this off and rotate our view around now. So I've snapped to my Z axis here. So I'm looking down the Z axis and I'm working on the YX plane. So I'm going to create my first curve here above this line. So let's do that first. And then I'm going to jump down to this field here where it says XY plane down. So I'm still in my XY plane here. And I'm going to now draw my next curve below that 0 horizon line. So once that's done, I'm going to now create my next guide or curve for the XZ plane. So I'm going to turn my camera around and I'm going to now work in this view here looking down the y-axis at the XZ plane. Again, I'll use my curve tool here and I will generate a new curve. So now I've got my 3 curves generated which comply with the planes that 3DCoat is expecting them to be on. Now at the moment you can see they're quite off center, but I'm just going to move them back into the center of my main grid. So I'm going to select all of my curves, I'm going to hit the move tool and I'm going to just move these back. And then I can use my dialog at the side here and move these, or use the widget here and I can move it basically to the center of that grid. Again, this isn't an important aspect of generating the mesh, it just keeps it more centralized for the purposes of this video. So let's deselect those curves now. Just because the tool is not selected, it doesn't mean I haven't got access to it again. I can simply click on the tool again and it brings back the dialog. So now let's assign our curves or guides to the appropriate fields here. To make this more simple, I'm just going to give these names based on what it's asking for here. You can name these anything you like. It doesn't need to be specific to this. I'm just showing how these relate. So let's start with this one. So here, there's 2 ways we can do this. We can either use this little pick icon here. Click on that pick icon. You can see my cursor changes and then I can click on that particular curve. Or I can just use the drop down box here as well to select those curves. So in this case, I'm just going to use this pick and I'm going to select this curve. Next, I'll go down to the XY down and I'll select this curve. And here on this one, I'll click on here and I can click on. And you'll notice that as soon as I click on that third curve, it's able to generate from these guides a mesh for me to use. If you want to deselect, let's say I've selected the wrong curve on here, then I can simply hit this little cross here to remove it from the field. So now I've got my mesh that's being previewed, and you can see here on the dialog that we've got draw normals, which gives us the indication of which direction those normals will be pointing in should I commit and apply this surface. If I turn that off, it simply removes those. Currently they are pointing outwards, which is essentially the way I want them to point. If I want to preview the surface before committing to it, I can click on this Draw Surface checkbox here, and it will preview that surface for me. Now this is a very subdivided mesh that it's using to generate, but it does give me an idea of the form that I have created. Let's just remove our grid, as we don't need that anymore. Let's turn this one off because I want to work at this lower subdivision level. Now here I can increase the amount of view spans to increase the resolution of this object, and I can use these small icons here to increment one span at a time. I can also create caps on the ends of here to fill in this area here, and if we look on the back, if I create a cap on the back, I can do the same there. I'm going to leave those off for now. So with this preview mesh on here, I can still come in and edit all these lines or all these curves. So here I've got my edit selection. If we go to Q, I'm going to use the same tool here to edit the points, and I can click on this point and start to move this mesh around, this preview mesh, because it's still looking at these curves as guides as to how it wants to create this mesh. So I can carry on refining like so. Now there's another way that I can refine this mesh as well, and that is by using this option here. So I'm just going to uncheck it for now, and we can see that we've got this option to use this slider, and it basically tries to inflate the mesh. If we look at the front view, we can see a little bit easier as to what it's doing. So it's flattening out between our XZ curve and our XY curve. So if I increase the value here, so it's interpreting the mesh between these two curves here and here, and the same between our curve here and the down curve here. Let's use that one, and we can see we can edit that. We can also, if we use this little icon here and click on one of this graph editor here, we can use this as well to get a little bit more shape in there should we need to. So it doesn't matter which axis I'm in, I can always come in with my Q menu and start to manipulate the original curves here, and the mesh, the preview mesh, will update. So once you're happy with the shape, you may want to mirror this across in the Z axis in this case, and we can do that to get this. I'm going to just leave it as is at the moment, and I'm just going to say apply mesh. So now we can see I've got my mesh created. My curves are still visible. I can just turn those off temporarily, and we can see our mesh has been generated from those curves. Now at the moment I've got this color selected here, which is represented by this color chip. I'll click on that color chip and I'll just change its color, make it a little bit brighter, and I'll just increase the opacity as well. So now you can see we have this mesh that's been created from our guides or our curves that we created. So now let's remove this object that we have here, and also let's remove the curves as well. So the poly group here represents this object that we can see here, and if I hit this little icon here, I'll remove the contents of this layer, i.e. the mesh that we've just created, leaving only the curves. Let's delete the curves. I'll select them all and hit this little icon here to remove them. The tool is now saying I can't create a surface because I've got no guides, which is fine. We're going to now move on to the next tool here, which I mentioned earlier in the video, which is also called Surface by 2 Views, but it's got this little numeric 2 and a different colored icon as well. And immediately you can see that I've been given a preview mesh here. And if I turn on the grid and the axis and zoom in, it has created a very small preview of a mesh. It's also generated the same curves in the curve tree here and labeled them XY top, down and XZ. You can see that in the tool options we have those already selected and set up for us. We have slightly different parameters on this tool where we can change the size of the X, Y and Z. We'll have a look at this momentarily, and we have our parameters up and parameters down, as well as our normal spans here. So looking at the dialog box, we can see here we have the size X, Y and Z as I mentioned earlier. And if I left click and drag on these, you can see that it's changing the size X down here, this axis here, and the Y and also the Z. This just gives you an idea of the shape changes that you can make based on your initial curves. So predominantly your curves are going to generate the shape, or responsible for generating the complete shape, but then we can further tweak those on an axis specific terms. We can also use this parameter as well, which does the same function. If I move to the front view here, we can see here that if we move it down closer to 0, we get these hard, sharp edges, and then the more we increase this, we are generating that interpretation between these two curves here, and the arc it creates between these two curves here to fill in that gap. We can change those parameters both on the up and on the down axis as well. It's just a little bit of refinement that you can make on those initial shapes, and of course with our spans we can increase and decrease the resolution of our object. It is worth noting that when you do change these parameters here, the next time you open the tool, these parameters will be set in there. So be mindful of that if you want to reset to its previous position. Also, we can, if we feel this is a little bit too small, we can use our move tool on here as well. So let's select our curves first and then our move tool for the curve. Click this little checkbox here and I'll just zero out the gizmo, so it's not going to affect any of the curves with this little checkbox on. So here I'll now uncheck it, and let's say I want to increase the size of these curves and therefore increase the size of that mesh as well. I can do that like so. So I'm actually just increasing the size of the curves. You can see that small delay when the preview mesh catches up with the actual size of the curves. Let's turn off the gizmo here and simply apply that mesh. You can also go in here before we do that and change, as we were doing in the previous example, you can go in here and manually change curve shapes. So you can get some nice organic type designs with this tool, and it just saves that step of creating your own. So let's just apply that mesh and hide our curves, and we can see here that we've got our shape, which we can go ahead and we can do whatever we like with that shape. In the next video, we'll continue to create meshes from tools that utilize curves. See you next time.